Campers, welcome back to the Met Opera Global Summer Camp Career Corner. I am your host, Susan Blackwell, and I am so curious, where are you watching from? And what is the coolest thing that's happened this week at the Met Summer Camp? Would you let me know? Would you let me know by throwing it into the chat thread? I'd love to hear from you. And while I'm waiting to hear from you, please remember that you can watch Rusalka for free until tomorrow. And if you have already seen it, I'm so curious to know, what was your favorite part? What was your favorite part? If you want to put that in the chat, I'd love to know. Friends, we are so excited for today's discussion. Know that you are going to have a chance to ask our special guest questions using the chat feature. So once we get started, I would love it if you could focus your comments in the chat on questions that relate to our conversation, so I can then pick some great questions to ask our guest. Thank you so much in advance. If you've been a person who's put a great question into the chat and I picked it, you know how exciting that can be when your question gets picked from all the way around the world potentially. So keep that in mind as we go ahead. So I am so thrilled, so over the moon excited to welcome this very special guest that we have today in the Career Corner. She is an absolutely remarkable director she's been at the helm of so many astounding productions, including Rusalka, the Rusalka from the Metropolitan Opera that you may have already watched. Everyone, would you please welcome today's Career Corner guest, Mary Zimmerman. Mary!
Hi, Susan.
Welcome to the Career Corner.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here with you. So happy that you made time for us. On behalf of myself and everybody who's watching this, I just want to begin by thanking you for all the amazing things that you have created in your life, because we get to see them, and they've created so many amazing feelings in all of us who get to experience them. So for people who love theater and for people who love opera, I feel like you are just a gift, and I just want to thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's for my own pleasure that I hope translates into the pleasure of the audience, but there's nothing I love more than making plays and making shows and working in the opera and all the rest of it.
Mary, you're really, really good at it. Before we get too far along, we're going to start with something that I like to call 60-second life story. I'm going to put 60 seconds on the clock, and then you have to tell us your whole life story. Make sure not to leave out the awesome parts. 60 seconds, starting now.
Perfect. I was born in Lincoln, Nebraska. My parents were both professors. And so for their work and research, we lived in England and France a little bit when I was young. So I say I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska, Paris, and London a little bit. I always did plays in the backyard and made my friends do them. And I even wrote plays when I was little and made them do them. But I never thought that I could seriously have a career in the theater, because even though I was making plays, I thought, well, theater's those beautiful people on stage, and I'm not like that. I won't be able to do that. And then in college, I majored in theater because I couldn't not, although originally I went for something else. And then I started doing lots of shows at school. And then I rented a little space and did something off campus. And then I did that a couple more times. And then people started to pay attention. And then I got
10
hired.
seconds.
And then Peter Gelb hired me to direct at the Metropolitan Opera.
You have a full 5 seconds left.
Oh, I do. That's all I'll take.
That is a fantastic 60-second life story. That you packed a lot in that 60-second life story. That was so good. I'm so fascinated by this Lincoln, Nebraska, Paris, and London.
Yeah. I mean, it was only for a year and 3 months that I was in those other countries, but definitely I was 5 and 6 when I was in England, and my mother took me to productions. She was what we call a culture vulture in the days, and she would take me to things. And I always tell a little story, if I may. Do I have time?
Of course you do. Now that 60-second life story is over, you have all the time in the world.
Going on and on. In London, we lived in a suburb, and there was a little woods behind our house called the Little Woods. Very English name.
Very aptly titled.
I used to play there by myself when I was 5 and 6, which is hard to imagine these days, but I did. And there was a clearing in the woods. And unbeknownst to me, every year there was a production in the woods of Midsummer Night's Dream. And I came across rehearsal of that production when I was 6 years old. And it was the famous scene between the fairies Oberon and Titania, ill met by moonlight, proud Titania. And the fairy king and queen have an argument. And then they run away from each other. And the fairy king ran around in 3 circles, trailing fabric, if I remember. And after about 3 times running around, he started laughing and laughing, this grown man, and he fell to the ground. And he said, how many times do we go around? And everyone laughed and laughed. And, I knew they weren't fairies. I knew it was pretend. There was no part of me that thought I'd stumbled into another world. But it was another world in the sense that these adults were playing. And I'd never seen that before. Such hilarity and playing and pretending and dressing up. And they were having such a good time. And I call that my primal scene of theater that I was just so attracted to. And I always remember that. We did go see the production, but I don't remember much about the production. I was very young and it was late at night. But I do very much remember stumbling
I can't
across
imagine you're playing in these woods that you love, that are very familiar to you. I can only imagine how much your little mind would have been
Yeah.
blown by stumbling across that. I feel like though you knew that it was real, there is magic to that. That must have been, that's like your superhero origin story. That's like,
The theater is magic. It's the invisible real. We pretend things until they're true and we feel them as if they're true. We say this chair is the throne of the King of England, and we all agree on that. And then we enter, like through the back of the wardrobe, into another land, which we share in a great intimacy with each other because we all agree to fall into it together.
there's another thing that you just said that in your 60-second life story that I want to double click on and expand. And it's what I call the Golden Palace, which is you said something about seeing other people do it and thinking, oh, that couldn't be my life because that's the privilege of other people. I don't know. When I call it the Golden Palace, I used to have in my mind that making theater and writing the great books and designing great architecture and all of those things were the privilege of other people. And maybe those people lived in a golden palace somewhere. I just knew they weren't me. It was other people. But somewhere along the line, that notion in your mind sort of, you worked it through and it sort of evaporated.
Yes, that's such a brilliant way of putting it. It feels that way, doesn't it? And I never dreamt I could have a career in the theater. I never dreamt I could do it. I wanted it more than anything in the world. But even though my parents were very accomplished, my mother was a professor in
Yeah.
the 1950s. They were very humble people who'd lived through the Depression. And, you know, there wasn't any sense that we could have size or largeness of any kind. And in fact, I think my success ended up frightening my parents somewhat. They didn't understand it. Even though my mother went to plays and things all her life, she kind of couldn't understand that I was, or my father, making my living in it. And I'll tell you, the only way you enter that golden palace is that it just dissolves around you and you don't notice because you're working so hard.
Mary, that is exactly right. The way I dissolved my golden palace is I was making work that I loved with people that I
Yes.
loved, and I was working so hard. Sometimes I say I went into a room and I was working so hard, I didn't realize the room was an elevator. And
Yeah.
the doors would open up and I would say, what high floor are we on now? So I think you're absolutely right. That's how you dissolve the golden palace, is by actually doing
Every
work.
project I did when I was young, and I produced myself when I was young. That's my 2 words of advice that people ask me for. I have 2 words: produce yourself. Make your friends do it. Rustle up $1.25 and do it. Because in this world, in this profession, you have to practice to get good at it.
Yes.
no one's going to really hand those circumstances to you. It's a kind of catch-22. You have to have gotten good at it before you can be hired to do it. So you just kind of do it for free with your friends or for very little money. And that's precisely what I did. And I thought every show I did was going to be my last. And then I just go back to being a temporary secretary, which is what I was. Or I'd end up being in academia somehow, because that's the family I came from. And actually I'm a professor at Northwestern, which is, a whole half of my life. But I was just driven because I had something I wanted to do. I just had a particular idea of something I wanted to stage, and then I just did it. Yes. And I did it over and over. There are other routes, such as interning and apprenticing and attaching yourself to institutions, but that's actually not the way I did it. I did it through producing myself.
This is something that other people in the Career Corner that we've talked to, I think sometimes we think that there's only one right path. Like when you're younger and you see somebody who has a job or a career that you would aspire to, sometimes we can believe that there's only one right path, and it's sort of it's the path that a lot of people have taken. But I feel like this is an echo we've been hearing, is that you made your own path in a way.
Yeah, and if I may tell another little story, I was friends with the theater director, Michael Greif, and one time I was visiting, and he was so disheartened because he wasn't going to get to direct Angels in America on Broadway. He directed it regionally, but he wasn't hired to direct it on Broadway. And there were several directors in that position and were heartbroken, absolutely heartbroken. I said, "What do you got coming up?" He said, "I don't know. It's this thing. It's called Rent."
I was going to say, Michael Greif's doing okay.
Yeah. And I think it's also extremely easy to feel that, like, if you missed out on one thing, that was your only chance. Right. It really isn't. That was just a turn in the road, and there's a lot of these roads lead the same place. Like if your heart is true about what you want to do, and you practice and you get good at it, and you work, all those roads are eventually going to find expression. It may be in a slightly different way, but they are going to find expression. It's devastating when you don't get a particular thing. Yeah. But, I kind of thought I wanted deeply to be an actress, but I never believed I was going to, because I didn't feel I was beautiful enough. And people would look at me in a certain way when I said I wanted to be an actress like that. I just got a sort of look, and I was very sensitive to that. But I nonetheless kept doing theater. I went to university first as a comp lit major, but transferred into theater in orientation week. And I thought, well, I'll just do this for 4 more years. I'll just indulge this, and then I'll figure out what I'm really going to do. And it just took even going back to graduate school to realize that, like, the fascination isn't being on stage. It's composing the story on stage. And I loved rehearsal. I always loved rehearsal, yes. But I kind of hated performing, frankly. Or I didn't like putting on the makeup and the wigs and stuff. True performers really love all that. I didn't love all that. I loved rehearsal. And as a director, that's the part you do.
That's right.
It's pre-production and it's rehearsal, both of which I just adore. And I don't have to
You don't have to do the wigs and all the other stuff.
And yet I see myself on stage. I did this show called Journey to the West, and I was watching the final moment of it. And, it's set in a sort of Chinese court, everyone in those kinds of costumes, and everyone was bending these branches of a pine tree to a certain direction, because that was a prophecy that the pine branches would bend to the east at the end. And this voice, when I was watching it inside my head, and I've only had a voice inside my head say something twice to me, and this was once, said, "That's what you look like." And I loved that. It felt like it was coming from somewhere else, but that sense of composition, the colors, the lighting, the coordination with the music, because I always use a lot of music in my original music in my plays I do. That's what I actually look like inside. Yeah.
Mary, jumping back to the very basics and the beginning of this, can you tell the people that don't know, what does a stage director do?
So a stage director generally takes a text. Now, in my In my life, I also do the text a lot of the time. I
That's right.
adapt these old stories into stage plays, but they take the text, in this case of an opera, study it a lot, and decide what the physical manifestation of that story is going to be. So, are you going to do it, say it's Romeo and Juliet, are you going to do it in old, Shakespeare times? Are you going to set it contemporary? What's it going to look like? And usually, as the director, you're in charge of hiring. The producer actually contracts them and pays them, but you choose your costume designer, your lighting designer, your sound designer, choreographer. And then you make the most important decisions at all, though not so much in opera, but in the theater, you cast it. And the casting reflects how you see the character. And sometimes, though, when you're auditioning, the actors can influence you to see the character in a different way. And so you cast in a different way than you thought. And then you rehearse the play, and you're in charge of rehearsals every day, and you're in charge of everything the audience sees, you are ultimately responsible for. Obviously, actors make choices and they make some different choices every night, but you've negotiated all of that, you've worked with all of that with them. And so it's the embodiment of the story in a precise, specific theater that you're in charge of. But if I may, could I address a little bit of difference between directing in the theater and directing in opera?
Please, yes.
So in opera, you have a very present boss that you don't have with a regular text. You have the music, and the music has its own pace and rhythm and life
Yes.
that the conductor is directing. The conductor is the director of the orchestra. He casts the orchestra and he tells them, I would like it faster here, slower here, according to the instructions of the music, but subject to lots of interpretation. Now, when I direct actors, say they have a line, where's the cat? And we negotiate we don't say it in these crude terms or so explicitly, but we're deciding how they're going to say that line along certain dynamics: pace, pitch, volume, speed, rhythm, and accent. And all of those are choices that are wide, wide open to us, how that piece of text is said. But in a musical score, many of those dynamics are set. So the actor can't sing an A if it's written as A flat, right? And if it says that it should be very quiet, he should probably not sing it very loudly. And the tempi are up to the conductor. And the singer just has to kind of climb that tiger when he or she steps on stage and go for that ride. But in the theater, all of that has a lot more flexibility. So in a way, a big part of your job is taken from you as a theater director when you go into opera, not any of the visual aspect, but that way of determining the meaning of a line. Although you discuss it and talk about it, ultimately it is going to be sung according to a very precise script, which is the score. And so this weirdly can sever the singer from their own feelings and their own body, because their voice is so colonized, if I may use that word, to the score. And I always say my number one job as a director of opera singers is that they not suddenly appear like actors in a silent movie who make big gestures and are very dramatic because they're severed from their voice. Because paradoxically, although you would think they're absolutely married to their voice, they're kind of severed from a lot of the individual choices we make when we're speaking that tie us to our real emotions. And they've got so much on their brain, so much they're watching in a way that the actor doesn't have to keep an eye on a conductor or keep an ear out in the same way and have a kind of remove from themselves because of that technical demand. So it's a very different way of working with the performers because they have this enormous task. And it takes enormous intellectual, emotional, and physical energy for them to be there unmiked with that orchestra and all of the herd of elephants that is live performance. And they have a little bit less control. They're not getting to make certain choices the way a theater actor is.
It's interesting that you say that because when I watched that production of Rusalka, one of the things that struck me is This acting is so good.
It is, and I try really hard, and I do get some casting choice these days because I know singers better, and I get casting choice in the supporting roles a lot. So I get to choose those that, have a reputation, or I know or can see that are very expressive and great on stage and are what we call in the theater in their bodies,
Yeah.
connected to themselves physically and have the ability to juggle all those balls at once. But yeah, we had a very wonderful experience on this show, and we were close, and we were especially personable with each other and tight and trusting, and
It
all of
it
that helped.
it really shows. We have a comment coming from Madam Captain. This is already one of the most inspiring talks I've seen so far during the summer camp. We're only 15 minutes in. Wow,
Yes,
indeed.
and
Thank you.
I wanted to acknowledge the other comment that came in from Traeger, I think it was, saying doing plays with their family, which I think is fantastic. Nothing could be better.
Ooh,
It is
I,
your family when you end up doing a play temporarily. Anyway,
here we
there
go.
you are.
Tegan says, I
Tegan.
love directing. I do plays with my family. So you are so inspiring. Thank you for being you. I'm pretty sure they're talking to you, Mary, not
What could
me.
be more fun?
What could be more fun? We have actually a great question, a video question, and you touched this, but I would love to hear from Steffi and have Steffi ask this question of Mary.
Hi, I'm Steffi. I'm from Talca, Chile, and my question for Miss Zimmerman is when, how, and why did you decide to work in theater and opera?
Now, we heard about this moment in the woods that you had, but I'm actually curious when that sort of when you really committed to this life.
I'm not sure. I feel like forgive me, but I always give a not satisfactory answer to this. I didn't, I feel as though I didn't quite choose it any more than you would choose who to fall in love with. You're in love before you've made that choice. I just so desperately wanted to do it. I didn't believe I would ever make my living at it, and that's why I continued into graduate school, I guess, and thought I'd just be a professor, which I also am, but
Yeah.
that I would be a professor. But why, when, how, and why? I can just tell you that the desire and the love was there very, very early. And in college started, I was in plays a lot, and then I started directing little things in graduate school. And it just, you know what, I started doing performance art pieces in a certain class with a certain very influential professor to me. He was a Jungian psychoanalyst as well as a performance art teacher. And he gave us these crazy assignments like stage a myth in a single image using only light and objects or your body, but no sound or speech. And I got so elaborate with these things, more and more elaborate with my little performance art pieces, that it became easier to not be in them, but to just
Yes.
to make them. That was the thrilling part to me. And so that was in graduate school. I'd say that I shifted away from wanting to be on stage and towards the really, really endlessly fascinating problems of storytelling on stage that the director's in charge of, like how to make this story clear, all of it. Like how there's directing is, it's all about people too, and how to like get something out of a person and get everyone to get along and all of that too. So
Yeah.
really in graduate school, I guess, is when I started moving towards direction. How I started producing myself. My dad had put $400 in a bank account in a stock when I was born, and it was now worth 800. And I called him and told him to sell it, and that I wanted to put on a show based on the notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci,
Ah,
which I'm about to remount in a coming year, maybe, if everything works out,
wow.
but that I've done over the years. And he told me I could borrow against it, so I did that instead. And why? Gosh, what is the fascination of it all? I think that there's something about the for a director, the okay, you're looking at the on stage, the beauty of the on stage life and everything the audience is experiencing, but you have the secret knowledge of the backstage life.
Ah,
You have this, there's
yes.
a doubling. It's like a doubling of reality, and it's even more rich. And I think all artists no matter, even if their work's really dark and they're interested in really sad things, all forms of art are a celebration of the world. We're so fascinated with aspects of the world, like the way people behave, or why does the prince betray Rusalka, or why does Rusalka change her own nature just to follow love? Well, people do that, you know? We're so interested in those questions that we want to try and work through them on stage. We want to try and rehearse them. And it helps us to see it in the third person. It helps the audience to not be thinking of themselves, but to watch real live people in a compressed way, 2 or 3 hours, go through a drama or death or the loss of something or the gaining of something or joy. It helps us to understand how those things happen, why people behave the way they do, the sort of nature of the world. So all art that seeks to recreate the world, even abstractly, even in dark ways, is an acknowledgement of the endless richness of the world and its complexity and its difficulty in trying to understand it.
There's something you said that just sparked me. I had a friend who he and his wife lived half the time in the United States and half the time in India. And he was saying how it doubled the richness of their lives because they would have 6 months with these friends, knowing that they would then get 6 months with this other group of friends. And they just sort of would go back and forth every 6 months. And what you're talking about, having a life in the theater, having a life in the opera, having a life in the arts, it does double your pleasure, because not only do you get to see these really cool, amazing, and make these really cool things, but you also get the pleasure of the collaboration with people and knowing what's happening backstage. I love that so much, Mary. I love that. I've never heard it put just like that. That was beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you.
Let's hear from Autumn in Toronto, who has, you've touched on this, but I think it's worth a little more exploration.
Hi, my name is Autumn from Toronto. My question for Mary Zimmerman is, in the beginning of your career, were you ever doubtful of your success?
I was very doubtful of my success. In fact, I wasn't even thinking of success most of the time. So since I've addressed that a little bit, I'll say that every single show I do, I have often a great deal of fear. The night before I begin rehearsals, I'm very, very nervous. I'm very nervous also because I'm about to go into a 4 to 6 week period in which I won't be able to really think about anything else or pay attention to anything else or escape the responsibility that I have for 6 weeks up to that kind of immovable opening night. Like nothing is, it's such a date with destiny. You can't get out of it, right? And in my own work, I often don't have a script, and I start only making the script when I'm with the actors. So in the moments between rehearsals, I write ahead of the actors one day. So it's very, very normal. In fact, I would think it's sort of necessary to doubt that you can do it. And in fact, I think I've sought to challenge myself, like starting to direct opera for me. I mean, I knew nothing and had no business doing it, probably. I can't believe Peter had faith in me. I'd made a little opera with Philip Glass, believe it or not, and directed another one by him. And I had done an opera in Chicago at Chicago Opera Theater, but it was already designed. It was like a rented set and costumes and stuff. That was the first thing I did. And then the next thing I did, I was at the Met, and that was, I was the learning, way out of my league. And I hope the learning curve was, is very steep. But, you will always, it's not a relaxing profession. It's crisis a day. And it's crisis on like the macro level and the macro level and the micro level. Like there's things to solve and deal with every day. And I love challenge. I've had to admit that about myself as I get older. It's like, oh, I keep throwing down, like I'll do a play in water. I'll do a play where no one speaks. I have a show called Steadfast Tin Soldier that has no spoken language in it. I'll do a play in a warehouse on 3 stories of the warehouse and the audience will move. I mean, I think, and then opera was like the greatest challenge to try and be myself. So the easy answer is like all the time, all the time. I do know that there are moments in rehearsal where, and they sometimes come very early, or that I love the set so much. We've designed the set and I love it so much that I say, we've cleared the price of admission. That's something I'll say that's as a sort of ritual, because I just feel like the set is so great, or this one performance is so great, or already these couple scenes are really good. We've cleared the price of admission.
I love that. Do you remember the first time you ever visited the Met?
Okay, the first time I ever visited the Met was when Peter had already asked me to do Lucia. And I actually, believe it or not, initially said no to Lucia. And then he said, well, listen, I was talking to Renee Fleming and I mentioned you, and she said, oh, I would love her to direct me in Armida. So I went to New York to take the meeting with Renee about Armida. And lo and behold, that night to go see a show at the Met was the old Lucia. And I watched it, and I don't mean to, sorry, my screen just went dark on me and I realized I hadn't done anything to it. And I don't mean any disparagement or anything, but I watched the Lucia that was before ours, and I thought, I could do this. I could enliven this. I think I could improve a little bit on this. And at intermission, I said to Peter, I think I'd like to do Lucia as well. So I was hard for both at the same time. And then Sonnambula just kind of rammed its way in there too. So that was my first visit.
That's a heck of a first visit. Wow.
Yeah, I was in the general manager's box, and I remember, and of course everyone knows this, but until you experience it live, it doesn't really hit you. I turned to my friend when they started and I said, he's not mic'd. And I knew that. I wasn't saying it like as a surprise. And actually, Lucia is famous for that cacciatore scene. It is actually really, really hard to sing over the orchestra and the male chorus. It's actually it's known as a quite difficult start. But I was just like, kind of couldn't believe that in this 3,800 seat house, this single guy, that we could hear him over a 65, 80 piece orchestra, whatever it is, and a 45 person chorus, that we could hear that. Like and it's a kind of definitional thing about opera. I've strayed a long way from the question, which
no, it's so
nervous. So yeah, that was my first visit to the Met.
That's a heck of a first visit.
Yeah.
Something that I'm realizing about you, Mary, that is so interesting and I relate to deeply. You are what I would call a multi-passionate person in your career. In addition to being a director, I think it's important to say that you do also write, you produce, you are an educator, you also teach. If somebody comes up to you at at a party or something and says, oh, it's nice to meet you, what do you do? How do you describe these multitudes that you contain?
They're all related. I mean, my writing is for the theater, and my teaching is about performance. I say I'm a director, but here's the tell. On my passport, I say professor, and I think that I think that's to honor my parents. I think that's why, because they were professors, and it's my steady job. You know what I mean? It's my annual sort of job, and it's a job that's allowed me in my career in the theater to only do what I really want to do. If you're just a frequent director and you don't have that anchor, you end up maybe taking a lot of projects that are interesting but not fascinating to you, or maybe you don't even like that much, but you take them and it's a good experience and all of that. But I've had the privilege, because I teach, that I've never had to hook my creativity to the plow. I've never had to make a plow horse out of it. And that's been a great advantage for me, a great privilege.
That makes sense.
I have these affiliations, Northwestern, and I'm affiliated with the Goodman Theater, and I'm affiliated with the Looking Glass Theater, which is an ensemble, both the Goodman and Looking Glass in Chicago. So I have these 3 institutional affiliations.
Kind of creative homes that you can
very much, and families. Yeah.
I love that. I hope that students that are listening can really hear this, because I think it's a great example of how you can Forge a career for yourself that contains all the parts of you, that contains all the things that you're interested in and passionate about. So I hope that students can really hear that. We have some great video questions. Could we hear from Ben in Kansas City?
Hi, I'm Ben from Kansas City, and I have a question for Mary Zimmerman. Why do you like directing fairy tales and mythology? Thanks.
Ben, I love your whole look, Ben. I love it.
I think Ben knows the answer to this because he's dressed up himself.
That's right.
Why do I like directing fairy tales? I think these old stories, fairy tales and myths, there's a reason they've been around for so long. And that's because even though they're very delightful and full of adventure and have a dazzling and sparkling surface, they have something to say about people that is always true, even though it might be reflected in tales of slaying dragons or being lost in the woods or being left alone as an orphan or something like that, some fantastical thing. Nonetheless, they speak to conditions that human beings always have to deal with, as opposed to something very realistic, tends to be a little bit tied to the current moment in a way that can become a little flat in the future. And I actually think that because myths appear to be happening in different time or fairy tales, they can also always address the present moment, no matter what's going on. There's these old tales that I do. I always say it's not a conspiracy of English teachers that we still read the Odyssey, for instance, Homer's Odyssey. It's because it's really good and because it has a lot to say about like growing up without a father or being homesick or not knowing where you are on the sea of life. And it has a kind of happy ending, a return and a kind of resurrection, which we all hope for. So I love staging also. Let me answer in a different way. I like staging impossible things.
Yes.
I don't forget what it's like in the backyard, if you have a backyard or in whatever room you play in, to have to like think, okay, how are we going to be flying? What are we going to do to indicate that we're flying in this story that we're telling ourselves? Those challenges have never, the thrill of them and of solving them has never left me. And myths and fairy tales tend to have, unrealistic things happen in them. And it's not like the movies where you can employ technical tricks to make it look like it's happening. You have to use your imagination and you have to look like things that look like the thing that you are trying to indicate you're doing. And everyone, the audience, as if they're a single person, they too imagine the same thing. And it reaffirms that we have a commonality inside ourselves. Like we understand, like if I flap my wings a certain way, well, that's a bird. And we understand we've all seen birds and that's what a bird looks like, or a fish or flying carpet or a camel or whatever. It brings us closer together to know that we have these images in our heads that are the same as the images in other people's heads. That makes us feel not so alone or different from other people, because we're all understanding this is meant to be flying, because we all are kind of have the same ideas and a kind of history inside of us that's common, that's a common experience in the world. So it's for those reasons that it's difficult and challenging. It draws us closer together when it's successful. And because those stories, I think, have lessons in them, and lessons sounds sort of boring and, I don't know, like preacherly or something, but they instruct us in life in useful ways, really useful ways.
I think, to what you were saying earlier about you love a good challenge, you love a good theatrical challenge. And one of the things that we love so much about your work is the way that you resolve those challenges. So if it says, if the way that on a stage with no special effects, no CGI, pirates jump out of the walls, or all of a sudden, there's a river flowing across the stage. Yeah. And I can imagine, like you were saying to Ben, in fairy tales, there's lots of fun challenges like that. Yeah, that is so cool. That's so cool. Oh no, Mary, it's joke o'clock. It's joke o'clock. It is. All right, here we go. Hit us with a good joke. Kathy from New Jersey jokes, what's a mermaid's favorite scale? Kathy, what is a mermaid's favorite scale? Mary, any guesses?
I can only think iridescent, but I don't think that's the answer.
That's a good scale. The sea scale. Kathy.
Scale. That is an excellent joke.
Good joke o'clock. Really strong joke o'clock. I don't know what we can follow that up with. So let's throw it to a video question, and this is a great one.
Hello, my name is Marius, and I'm from Prince Edward Island, Canada. Your productions of Rusalka and Lucia di Lammermoor remind me of Tim Burton's design aesthetic. What materials did you use to make these ominous, perfect, and gothic productions? Thank you.
Great
Thank you,
question, Marius.
You know, for Lucia especially, and I'm so happy you've seen Lucia, my set designer and I, we went to Scotland, and we went to an old castle called Culzean Castle that we knew that Sir Walter Scott loved and had visited as a child. We went to Walter Scott's home. Walter Scott's who wrote the novel that Lucia di Lammermoor is based on. And we had great adventures. When we went up to the castle, it turned out it was closed. It hadn't yet opened for the season, but we snuck in and we crept all around. And if I'd prepared to share my screen, I could share. Maybe you can post something. I can post something afterwards of pictures from that trip. So we researched real life. I've done like the Jungle Book, and I got the producers to send us to India. I've been to Czech Republic several times because there's a wonderful theater design convention called the Prague Quadrennial. But I went to where Dvorak had lived. There's a plaque and some other things. But we just think in terms of Tim Burton, like there's an extravagance and a detail there, and you're right, a gothic quality. I'm very flattered by the comparison. And I think you're kind of seeing things in Lucia that we're suggesting, but maybe aren't actually on stage, but we're suggesting them rather carefully. One thing you might have noticed, although I don't know if on video it shows this, but there's act curtains that are pictures of cracked, bare tree branches. And my set designer lay down in the middle of the road in Scotland and photographed straight up to take those pictures. And for us, the increasing branches for each act on those act curtains is a sign of Lucia's increasing hauntedness or madness, like there's a crack in her brain. I always thought that bare tree branches looked like the cardiovascular system and the neural system. So I thought of that as the inside of Lucia, sort of taking over her craziness. But we do all kinds of real life research. When we're lucky, we go to the country. But of course, in something like Rusalka, we use our imagination. And let me tell you about Rusalka a little bit, if I may.
Yes.
Rusalka, as it's written, has two sets. It has the lake, and then it has outside the prince's palace. And there's a dramaturgical or storytelling reason for that, and that's because Vodnik can only live in the water. So if he's going to be there, there has to be the sort of fountain or pond. But it has the effect also, when I saw the Met production before I did mine, the older production, the whole entire show is set at night and it's outdoors. So we're always in the twilight. And I thought that was causing a kind of sleepy effect on the audience to always be at night. So I thought, how can we get more variety in there? And I thought, well, when we go into the witch's hut, we go somewhere else. We use this trick in the theater called an in-one curtain. And that means it's down in the first portal of the stage. So we dropped an in-one curtain, and then madly, while they're in the witch's hut, while she's with Yezi Baba, behind that curtain, there are 85 guys working really, really hard to take away the tree and the pond and to take us to a meadow. Because I thought when the hunter comes in, we hear those horns and it's dawn. And I wanted the world to change. I wanted it to be like the first morning of the world, because for Rusalka it is, that she could be awake and walking around in daylight. So I wanted a really high contrast between the shadowy blue watery world, and then this brilliant yellow flower world of land where the hunter finds her. Then in the second act, I thought, well, can't we move it inside? And I instructed Eric Owen, who played Vodnik, to be suffering when he's not in the water, to be staggering. Here he is in the water in this picture, but when he shows up at the palace and she puts his hand in a bucket of water as though that's how to keep him alive. But I thought if we can be indoors, I can have it brightly lit or all kinds of different colored lighting for the ball. We can have different colors, different times of day. We don't have to be in the dark outdoors for the whole 3 hours of the opera, because it refreshes us to have that change. And we even had an in-one scene at the beginning of Act 2 where the turnspit and the cook talk in a hallway, and I have Rusalka, we get a preview of their relationship not being so good, they run by. Right. And then I get to reveal which was our favorite set, that indoor set. And, the prince is often equated with a hunter. He is a hunter. And so we wanted deer antlers, but David McVicker did a brilliant production with deer antlers all over the walls here in Chicago, which I purposely didn't see because he's a genius and I'm intimidated, but I've seen a picture. So we just threw our deer antlers in a corner as though he were careless. And there was something grotesque and fairy castle, like evil fairy castle about that to me. So that's just a few. And then when we go back, I wanted the pond to have changed in Act 3, because, when you fall in love, it enchants the world and everything looks beautiful. And when love is stripped away, you lose love, you're betrayed, as she is, deceived and betrayed. You can feel like the world has lost all of its charm and that you're seeing beneath the beauty to just a kind of banal, not so beautiful world. So we wanted to strip the first set as though it's actually entirely different. It's not the first set stripped down. It's a whole different build. But we wanted it to look like that set sort of dismantled and exposed as just a kind of illusion of the past. A ruined thing. Nothing. I love design more than anything. I love it.
Oh, Victoria has a nice comment.
Yes.
I want to be an opera director even more now.
The world needs good opera directors, and I'm not even saying I'm one of them. We need some good theatrically minded opera directors. Opera is such the vanguard in terms of scenic design. It can do so much. It's so grand. It's so big. And because the same operas are done over and over all the time, there's a kind of demand that there be freshness and newness with each production. Even if you're doing it in a traditional way, you want to just refresh it in some way, be unique in some way. People know the story, and so they're able to compare, productions, because they'll see maybe a dozen different bohèmes in their lives, and they can look at the different bodies it takes on, because the score is going to stay the same, but the production's going to change,
Yeah. Let's hear from another one of our students.
I'm answering too long on these. I'll speed it up.
No, you're doing perfectly. This is what Career Corner is. This is great. Let's hear from Elise. Elise from Boston. Here we go.
Hi, my name is Elise, and I'm from Boston, Massachusetts. My question is, how many hours or days does it usually take to put the whole entire opera performance together? Thank you.
Thank you, Elise. Great question.
Thank you so much. And those pictures behind you are beautiful. I take it you may be the artist of those. Elise, we plan a production for a couple years. That's when we're working out how to design it and how it should look. But then we rehearse it for about 3 weeks in a rehearsal room. And then we have a week on stage, which is called technical rehearsals. And during that, we're adding technical elements, which you probably heard about from Paula, I wonder. But we add lights and costumes, and then we add the orchestra. So all in all, we're all together, everyone together making the opera for about a month. But there's years of planning, and the building of the set and of the costume starts maybe 6 months or a year before we're actually in rehearsal. But we're together for about a month.
And you were saying, Mary, that during that time when you're together, You sort of eat, sleep, and breathe that production, it sounds like.
Yeah, especially in opera. I have to go home and do my homework for the next day. I have to study the score a lot and I have to remember because I'll tell you, Elise, a really hard aspect is it's in a different language than languages I speak. And so I have to really make sure day by day, when we're about to do a scene for the first time, that I really know what happens in that scene and what the words mean. Which I can't keep them all in my head, but I can try really hard to study really hard and know what the music is doing, particularly in that scene. And I have ideas about where I'm going to tell the actors to move in the scene, but that may change. Once we're rehearsing, they have better ideas, or I have a different idea when I see it up on its feet with real people.
It's a lot of details and a lot of, oh my gosh, it's joke o'clock again.
Time is flying.
It's joke o'clock. Hit us with a good joke. Here we go. This is from Penelope and Gertie in New York City. What do you call a singing vegetable? What do you call a singing vegetable? Mary, any thoughts? What do you call a singing vegetable?
I'm racking my brains for any vegetable that has some sort of musical, but I can't think of it.
Elvis Parsley! Come on. Come on, joke o'clock.
These are excellent.
That's such a good joke. I can't imagine it did take two people to come up with that joke. It's
Yes.
that good. It's that high quality.
It is that good.
Let's hear from, you were referring to your production of Jungle Book earlier.
Yes.
Romy has a question specifically about Jungle Book for you.
Hello, I am Romy from Oak Park, Illinois. My question for Mary Zimmerman is, how many times did you have to watch the Jungle Book before making it into a play?
Jungle Book is the one play I've done that has already has a visual form, right? Like when you read a book and you make it into a play or script, you're not looking at a visual thing, you're looking at words on a page. But Jungle Book was intimidating because there's such a famous, the new movie wasn't out yet, it was the old cartoon movie. Mm-hmm. And there's so many famous parts to it. And like when the snake becomes like a staircase or ties himself in a knot. And I was like, how am I going to do this on stage in a way that it can't do what a drawing can do. So how am I going to figure out how to do it? I don't know that I watched it too many times, maybe 2 or 3, because I also didn't want to be, trying exactly to imitate it. And my script ended up being, somewhat different. I wrote a script that was absolutely based on the movie script, but had differences. So I watched it, but it's like when you do an opera and there are other productions, I want to know what they look like because I don't want to accidentally copy something.
Sure.
Have the same idea as someone else. And people in the opera world often travel around the world and see these productions. And with the internet, they'll have seen them. But you don't want to be intimidated too much by them or, feel that you have to recreate something. So I just watched it two or 3 times, maybe 5 or 6 altogether. Disney, who I worked with, gave me wonderful drawings from the backgrounds of the jungles. And I did study those and alternate drawings of the characters that they didn't end up using and just very interesting things like that. I got to look at the archives of the film.
That is so cool. And I want to take a question also from the chat because we have some good questions coming in. Vikram says, this is a question coming from New Delhi, India. Vikram, hello. We're so happy you're here with us. What language script has been the easiest and most comfortable to direct? Now, you were saying earlier that you have to do your homework the night before so you're prepared for rehearsal because that language isn't familiar. But what has been the most comfortable for you?
Well, Italian, because I do know French pretty well. And I started trying to learn Italian just for the sake of all this bel canto I was doing. Czech was, of course, the hardest, and I would say sort of impossible. We have Czech speakers in the room, but no one in the cast was a native Czech speaker, and I certainly am not. And I sometimes, I'll confess, I feel kind of fraudulent, like considering how important text is to me as a theater director, to not know at every moment, just syllable by syllable, what they're saying and having to look it up. That is uncomfortable. I was going to direct a French opera at the Met, and then they decided to go with a production that already existed. So I didn't get to, but I was really looking forward to that. Or English. Actually, I answered incorrectly. I've done this new opera, which is coming to the Met. I don't think that's a secret, based on Sarah Ruhl's Eurydice, and it's in English, and that was wonderful. There's no veil,
Yes.
There's no veil between you and what they're saying that you have to kind of work to penetrate.
That's right. Fun fact, Rusalka is the 4th opera that Mary Zimmerman has directed for the Met. Mary, you've got this is quite a career corner, because you have quite a career. Here's a great question from Ashai. As an opera director and playwright, how does it feel to see other people bring your visions and creations to life? What must that be like for you, Mary?
It's so interesting. I have a play called Metamorphoses and several other plays that are done a whole lot by schools and universities, as well as some professional productions. Usually if it's a big professional production, they want me to come direct it, but they're done in schools all the time. And I love when kids send me pictures of those productions and how they solve certain problems. I love it. I will admit, like, sometimes I'm invited to a university because they're doing a play of mine, and I have to admit I'm very nervous. Like, I'm afraid, like, oh, what if they don't do it the way I think, and there are those moments where, like, why did they do that so fast? They need to slow down there. I'm full of that. And I try to, it's hard, but I try to, take my ego and shove it in a corner and see what great things they are doing. And there have been, some really astonishing embodiments of plays I've done. Operas I've never. Well, I did write the libretto for an opera. I didn't mention this. The second opera I made with Philip Glass, or the one I made with him, is called Galileo Galilei, and I wrote the libretto. And that is done sometimes. So in that case, I've seen other operas. But of course, when someone else does Rusalka, I have no claim on Rusalka. It's Dvorak's Rusalka, and I'm just one of the people who've contributed to its embodied life at one point or another. So it's thrilling and it's scary. It is scary. I'll admit it.
Yes, that makes sense to me. So we had a question the first week of camp. We have a great question from Isla in Bangor. And I just love this question so much. I've made it a part of Career Corner. Thank you, Isla. I appreciate it. I owe you a quarter. Here's a twist on Isla's question. If you didn't work as a director, what would you like to do?
Oh, wow. Is it Bangor, Maine, by the way? Because
so.
I'm about to leave for Islesboro on Monday. So I know Bangor well.
So say hi to Isla when you're there.
Hi, Isla. Gosh, I guess I would just be a teacher first, and I'm already that. I always thought when I was little, I wanted to be an ornithologist or an ichthyologist. I love the natural world.
Yeah.
Or I might have been, I don't know. I mean, I guess the fantasy one that I never could quite penetrate the Golden Palace for myself was to be just a writer who made up her own stories rather than adapting. I think I worship authors so much from the moment I learned to read. That's my great love of my life, is reading. That's my Golden Palace, that I feel like maybe it's hard even to think of. I always say I'm an adapter, not a playwright. I'm an adapter because I didn't make up the stories, So I guess but I still don't even know if I have the confidence to do that.
Isn't that amazing? It's amazing to hear somebody who is such an accomplished writer say that they feel like that's still a little bit out of their reach. It's interesting. Yeah. We're all continuing to learn and grow, no matter what age we are. I actually have a fun question from Colin in Illinois. Hit us with that question, Colin.
My name is Colin, and I'm from Oak Park, Illinois. And my question for you is, what's your favorite thing to do in Chicago?
I love this question. I mean, I actually live in Evanston, which is a suburb of Chicago, but I'm like a quarter of a mile from Chicago. I love the lakefront. I like going to the theater. I like eating out in restaurants. in Chicago and seeing my friends there. I love Lakeshore Drive. That's my commute, up and down the beautiful Lakeshore Drive. Sort of doesn't get old except when you're really stuck in traffic. But I love being by the lake, and you can still sort of see the stars and how there's so many airplanes. You can follow the flight paths of the airplanes to O'Hare. So I love all of that in Chicago. I like being on the L and you guys, I think a good place to get ideas is when you're in motion, like on the L train or walking and just leaning and looking out the window, and you kind of go into a little meditative state. I sort of like that. But I like meeting my friends. I like meeting my friends for dinner somewhere, Chicago, going to a movie, that kind of thing.
Fun.
Simple thing. Yeah.
In that answer, it also struck me, Mary, that you were talking earlier about having these adventures where you say go to a castle in Scotland, or you're with a collaborator who lays down in the road to take a photograph. And you just said it so succinctly. When you said that, I was like, oh, you go on adventures to collect sparks of inspiration and take them back. Like you sort of collect them and bring them back and put them into this work that you make. And I think you don't even have to go to Scotland. Like you were saying, you could ride the train, or just riding in the car and looking at the things as they go past in the window. That's a great time to collect those sparks.
Believe me, being an artist is seeing the enchanted in your own backyard. I'm happy I grew up in Nebraska. Its beauty is so plain. And I had to look hard to find it and learn how to see aesthetically, to see things as beautiful, to see the beauty and just the reflection in the rut in the road, of the water, of the fields, or the meadowlark singing, or these little things. I didn't grow up in some, to me, very beautiful, but it wasn't a fancy place at all.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that. So, Mary, we're almost done, but before we let you go, you've made so many extraordinary things. You are in the middle of a really interesting career. Do you have any wise words for us? Any wisdom?
I said it earlier. When I'm asked this, I always just say produce yourself, but by which I mean, it has a deeper meaning than just like put on a play yourself. It means make yourself, right? Our profession in particular, it's not like being a doctor where you go through steps on a ladder, or a businessman and you climb a kind of ladder. You have to kind of make those steps yourself, and you have to practice. You have to practice in order to get good. So don't wait for perfect circumstances, or to have enough money, or to have enough time. Just grab the moment and make something. That's the all important thing. Even if no one comes, even if it's terrible, you will have succeeded in your goal. And your goal was to try and make something, and you succeeded in that. And you will have a very, very rich experience doing it. You will have a hugely rich experience doing it, even if it's like kind of a nightmare and didn't work out the way you wanted it to and everything else. You can't be in this profession without like trying and failing and failing. Like that's just exactly what it is. And I think ultimately you have to measure success entirely by how you feel about it. I haven't read reviews since I was about 21 years old, or I guess I didn't even start 21, but 25, whenever it was. It's successful if it expresses this thing within you, and hopefully it will find resonance in other people. But if you're happy with it and you loved it, then you've made this great, beautiful, temporary thing. It's like those Zen paintings that the Zen masters do in sand and then they blow away. The theater is like that. It's always disappearing. That's why flowers are our opening night gift, because they're a sign of the temporary nature. It's no matter how successful and brilliant, one day it's going to close. No matter what, Hamilton's going to close one day. Like Lion King's going to close one day. And those are the extraordinary exceptions. No matter how great it is, it has a certain life that will fade and go. And the practice of devoting yourself to something beautiful that you know is not material and can't last, there's something of the spiritual in that. There's something of the divine in that, to me.
Mary, I cannot thank you enough for taking time out of your busy life to come to talk to us in the Career Corner. It has been
totally my pleasure.
Absolute joy. Clara says, that's great advice. I needed that. Clara, I needed that too. Oh, thank you so much, Mary. Have a wonderful day. And we can't thank you enough.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Mary Zimmerman, I can't believe it. She's legendary. I mean, if Rusalka is the only thing that you've seen that Mary Zimmerman has directed, do yourself a favor and see if you can find ways of seeing her other work. Look at pictures of it, read about her. She is, boy, she is so wise and she is so creative. She just knocks me out. Anyway, Mary Zimmerman. Wow. So coming up next week on Career Corner, we have got Melissa Wagner, who runs the Met Opera National Council auditions. If you were here for our conversation with Peter Gelb, you'll remember that we talked about those auditions because students were curious about, how do you find your way into a career at the Met? And one way is through these auditions. I've spoken with Melissa before, and she's really fun to talk to, and she has so much to share. So if you have questions for Melissa, we like a good video question, and you could submit a video question to summercamp@metopera.org. And don't forget, campers, tomorrow is Camper Showcase at 12 noon Eastern Standard. If you haven't submitted your creations, you still have time, and you could submit them through the Google Classroom or to summercamp@metopera.org. We love seeing what you make. Until next time, I'm Susan Blackwell. This has been Career Corner. Bye, campers. I'm out.